The galactic consensus has 73 unbreakable laws. The first is do not interfere with pre-FTL species. The 73rd, carved in sorrow and terror, is do not, under any circumstance, anger the humans. The 72 laws in between are the direct result of what happened when a species, the proud and ancient Veltri, broke the first law with humanity. This is the story the galaxy tries to forget, the fate they hide from ambitious young civilizations. They whisper it in hushed tones, a grim fairy tale to keep the peace. Once we pushed them. Once they showed us what they truly are. And now, the Veltri are a monument to silence. This is why. The grand spire of the galactic consensus shimmered like a needle of ice and light, piercing the perpetual twilight of the central world, Ethel. Within its highest observation chamber, Ambassador Kalen of the Veltri stood, his four slender arms clasped behind his back, his feathered crest held high in pride. Below, the tapestry of 1,000 species embassies sprawled, a testament to civilized order. The Veltri had helped weave that order over 10 millennia. They were architects, philosophers, the gentle shepherds of younger races. Or so they believed. Before him, on a simple data slate, played the grainy, chaotic footage from a little blue world known as Terra, orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. It showed a primitive, bipedal species engaged in its endless, cyclical brutality. Trenches, explosions, crude projectiles. They called it the Great War. Kalen's mandibles clicked in distaste. "Observe, counselor," he said to the floating, gelatinous form of the Saurian counselor beside him. A species trapped in its own violent ID. They poison their own world, slaughter each other over patches of dirt and ideological phantoms. They are a cancer of potential, ready to metastasize into the galaxy. The Saurian pulsed a slow, anxious blue. They are pre-FTL, Kalen. Law 1 is absolute. Their path is their own. Their path will lead to a plague of warships. Kalen countered, his sonorous voice resonating in the chamber. We have seen the projections. Their rate of technological acceleration is aberrant. In a mere galactic blink, they will achieve jump drive. And what will they bring with them? This. He gestured at the slate, showing a muddy, corpse-strewn battlefield. We have a moral duty, not just to the galaxy, but to them, to spare them from their own nature. A gentle guiding hand, a pruning of their aggressive tendencies before they can infect the stars. His proposal, the gentling, was a masterpiece of Veltri bioengineering. A subtle, airborne retrovirus. It would target the amygdala and associated neural pathways, damping the human capacity for sustained aggression, for territorial rage, for the very concept of total war. It would not make them docile, the Veltri insisted. It would make them civilized. They would become artists, thinkers, peaceful traders. They would thank the Veltri in time. The debate in the High Council was fierce, but short. The Veltri's reputation was impeccable. Their logic, presented with calm, paternal certainty, was overwhelming. Fear of what humanity might become tipped the scales. Law 1 was suspended by a narrow majority. The gentling was approved. Operation Seed Fall commenced. Unmarked Veltri whisper ships slipped past the solar system's Oort cloud. They released the viral payload into Earth's upper atmosphere, where it diffused, colorless, odorless, undetectable to 1918 human science. The Veltri watched from orbit, satisfied. They observed the initial spread of a particularly virulent influenza strain, a convenient, tragic coincidence that masked the retrovirus's initial integration phase. They saw the war end, as humans tired of conflict, more quickly than projected. See, Kalen remarked to his science team, even the first stage shows efficacy. Their peace talks gained momentum with uncharacteristic speed. They monitored the 1920s and 30s. Human art flourished. Music, literature, and cinema entered golden ages. Yet, troubling blips appeared. The rise of hypernationalistic ideologies, fascism, supremacist dogma, all concepts rooted in a different kind of aggression. Not hot rage, but cold, systematic hatred. The Gentlings seemed to have channeled the violence, not erased it. The Veltri Science Council dismissed it as socio-political noise, a final spasm of the old paradigm. They were still debating corrective measures when their orbital sensors screamed with alarms. It was 1945. Over a city called Hiroshima, a son was born on Earth. The flash bleached their screens. The shockwave of data that followed was a physical blow to the Veltri observers. Fission, atomic weaponry. They had not just miscalculated, they had catastrophically misread the fundamental equation of humanity. The Gentling had failed, or had it done something infinitely worse? The Veltri watched in real time as the species they had tried to prune unleashed the very power they had sought to prevent. The bomb was not just a weapon. It was a statement, a scream of primal defiance that echoed in the silent vaults of Veltri science. Kalen, watching the mushroom cloud bloom, felt the first cold trickle of a dread he could not name. The cancer had not been cured. It had been taught to metastasize in silence, and now it had just announced its new, terrifying form. Panic, cold, and methodical gripped the Veltri High Command. The Hiroshima event was not an anomaly. Nagasaki confirmed it. Humanity had leapfrogged expected technological milestones with impossible speed. The Gentling retrovirus, subjected to frantic new analysis, revealed a horrifying truth. It had not dampened human aggression. It had refined it. It had suppressed impulsive, chaotic violence, but in doing so, it had inadvertently focused the human psyche. Their aggression became calculative, patient, and strategic. The drive to conquer, to dominate, to secure resources, and eliminate threats was stripped of distracting passions like rage or hatred. It became pure, efficient, and horrifically logical. The Cold War was humanity's new face, and the Veltri watched it unfold like a nightmare. They saw the grim, unsmiling men in rooms, moving pieces on a global board, contemplating mutually assured destruction with a chilling, detached pragmatism. They saw the space race, not as a joyful exploration, but as a silent, desperate bid for the ultimate high ground. Every V-2 rocket, every Sputnik beep, every Apollo landing was a footstep on the staircase the Veltri had accidentally helped them build. "We created a predator that thinks," lamented senior geneticist Vora, her feathers molting from stress. "Their aggression is no longer a fire. It is a laser." The consensus demanded answers. The Veltri, paralyzed by shame and fear, lied. They reported the Gentling as a partial success, citing the lack of a third global war. They buried the data on the retrovirus's true effects. To admit their error would shatter their credibility and invite galactic sanctions. They decided on a new, desperate plan: the quarantine. They would use hidden gravity projectors at the edge of the solar system to subtly distort space-time, making slipstream jumps into or out of the system mathematically impossible. They would cage the beast they had created, buying millennia to find a solution. The project was immense, requiring vast, cloaked installations in the icy void. For decades, Veltri engineering crews worked in the dark, their fear a constant companion. They monitored Earth. They saw the digital revolution not as an age of information, but as an age of surveillance and cyber warfare. They saw globalization not as unity, but as the creation of interdependent, vulnerable systems. The human mind, focused by the Gentling, was building a world of exquisite, fragile complexity, a world ripe for a specific kind of domination. The quarantine was activated in 2015. Ethel celebrated. Humanity was contained. Then, in 2042, the impossible happened. A lone human research vessel, the Edison, probing the anomalies of the Kuiper Belt, experienced a catastrophic luck. A freak micro-black hole fluctuation, magnified by the quarantine field's own gravity lensing, tore a temporary, unstable rift in space-time. The Edison, along with its crew of 12, was hurled across light years, emerging crippled and leaking atmosphere in the middle of the bustling shipping lane near the Saurian homeworld. The galaxy's first contact with humanity was not a proud warship or a diplomatic envoy. It was a dying vessel of explorers and scientists. The Saurian, compassionate and protocol-bound, rescued the crew. They treated the humans, studied their ship, and accessed its databases. What they found in those databases, historical records, medical files, cultural archives, sent tremors through the Saurian Science Directorate. The genetic markers of the Genling retrovirus were all over the human genome. It was a perfect damning match. The Veltri were summoned before a shocked and furious galactic consensus. The lie was laid bare. The Saurian presented the evidence. Kalen, now ancient and brittle, stood in the same chamber where he had once argued for the Genling. The air was no longer one of debate, but of accusation. You violated Law 1. You unleashed an abomination upon a species, and then you lied to cover your failure. The Saurian counselor boomed. Kalen drew himself up. We contain them. The quarantine holds. We will find a cure, a reversal. His plea was cut off by a priority alert. The human ship, the Edison, its systems patched by Saurian engineers, had received a data burst from its home system. The humans had been analyzing Saurian technology, their medical scanners, their basic physics. In 12 standard hours, they had not only learned the Saurian language, but had formulated a coherent theory of slipstream travel. The Edison's captain, a woman named Eris Thorne, requested an open channel. Her face appeared on the central display, pale, tired, but with eyes of terrifying calm. She spoke not in her own tongue, but in flawless high Saurian. We thank you for our lives, she said, her voice quiet but carrying. We have analyzed our situation and the foreign genetic manipulation we have discovered in our bodies. We have deduced the existence of the civilization you call the Veltri and their actions. We have a question for the galactic consensus. The chamber was utterly silent. What is your question, Captain Thorne? The Saurian asked. By what right? She asked, each word precise and cold as a scalpel. Did the Veltri decide the fate of our species? And by what right does the consensus now decide it? We are not a specimen. We are not a patient. We are humanity, and we will have our answer. She did not speak in anger. There was no fire, no bluster. It was the calm, focused inquiry of a being whose capacity for outrage had been genetically honed into a demand for absolute accountability. In that moment, the galaxy did not see a victim. It saw a judge, and the Veltri, for the first time in their long history, felt the true weight of fear. The Edison's transmission was a shockwave through the galaxy. The Veltri's moral authority crumbled to dust. Sanctions were levied, their council seat suspended. But the political fallout was a distant concern compared to the immediate, chilling reality humanity knew. And they were not pleading for a cure. They were demanding an answer. Captain Eris Thorne and her crew, granted asylum by the Saurian, became the galaxy's most scrutinized beings. They learned with a speed that defied belief. Within weeks, they were conversant in a dozen major languages. Within months, they were contributing to advanced physics forums. The Geneling's focus was a superpower. They absorbed, synthesized, and innovated, their minds laser-targeted on a single goal, understanding the galaxy that had trespassed against them. The Veltri, meanwhile, descended into chaos. Public shame turned to internal strife. The military caste, the Talons, argued for preemptive action. They are one ship. We can erase this embarrassment, blame it on pirates. The scientist caste pleaded for more time to develop a reversal. The old families, like Kalen's, crumbled under the disgrace. Kalen himself, stripped of title, became a ghost in the Spire's lower archives. He spent his days poring over the human data, the very data he had once dismissed. He studied their wars, not just the battles but the aftermaths, the Marshall Plan, the rebuilding of shattered enemies, the relentless, patient construction of systems of law, of commerce, of deterrence. He saw not just the atomic bomb, but the Non-Proliferation Treaty, not just the Cold War, but the fall of the Berlin Wall, negotiated not from a position of overwhelming victory, but of calculated, strategic peace. The horror deepened. The gentling hadn't created monsters. It had created supreme realists. Humans didn't want vengeance. They would want justice, and, failing that, security. And they would do anything to secure it. His epiphany came too late. The Veltri Talons, without official sanction, moved. A stealth flotilla, using their now illegal cloaking tech, slipped into Saurian space. Their mission, obliterate the Edison and all aboard, making it look like a tragic accident. It was a desperate, stupid gamble born of panic. The attack on the Saurian research station was swift and brutal. Veltri energy lances pierced the habitat dome. But the humans were not there. Captain Thorn, anticipating the move, had convinced her Saurian host to relocate to a secure facility hours before. The Talons only found empty labs. What they did not anticipate was the human response. Thorn and her crew had not been idle. Using scavenged parts, Saurian goodwill, and their own frightening ingenuity, they had built a subspace transmitter from the Edison's wreckage. It was crude, powerful, and directed at a single point, the quarantine field generator nearest to Sol. As the Veltri ships fled the failed attack, a compressed data burst, a package of everything they had learned. Veltri biology, ship signatures, tactical doctrine, and the precise coordinates of the quarantine installation was fired through the temporary rift that had brought them, amplified by the Saurian's own comm relays. It was a message in a bottle hurled back into the cage. On Earth, the signal was received. The world had been united for decades under the silent, focused pressure of the gentling mind. They had known something was wrong, a vague genetic unease. Now they had proof and a target. The Veltri Talon fleet returned home, expecting reprimand but believing the problem contained. They were met with silence from the quarantine monitoring station. Then a visual feed finally arrived, lagged, and grainy. It showed the icy asteroid that housed the generator. It was shattered, not bombed. It looked dismantled. Jagged edges, precise cuts, key components neatly removed. And floating amid the debris, painted in stark black on a piece of white hull plating, was a symbol, a simple circle with a line through it, the human symbol for prohibited or nullification. It was not an act of war. It was an act of precise, surgical deconstruction. A statement, your cage is gone. The quarantine had fallen. In less than a standard year from first contact, humanity was free. Panic, now galactic, replaced outrage. The consensus assembled an emergency fleet, a show of force to meet this new species at the threshold of their system, to establish boundaries, to negotiate from a position of strength. Hundreds of ships from a dozen species gathered at the former quarantine line. They waited. Space remained empty. Then, a single vessel translated into normal space. It was not a warship. It was a blocky utilitarian craft, clearly built in haste. It bore no weapons they could detect. A signal broadcast on all frequencies, in perfect consensus trade tongue, crackled across the fleet. This is Administrator Eris Thorn of the Terran Sol system. The blockade of our species is over. You are trespassing in sovereign human space. Withdraw beyond the heliopause of our star. You have 24 hours. Laughter echoed in some of the alien command decks. One ship? Against the consensus armada? The Veltri commander, seizing a chance for redemption, moved his dreadnought forward, energy cannons powering up. You will stand down, human. You will submit to consensus authority. On the view screen, Thorn's face was impassive. You are a Veltri vessel. You have no authority here. You have 19 hours, 58 minutes. The Veltri commander fired a warning shot across the human ship's bow. Thorn didn't flinch. She simply said, observe. The transmission shifted. It showed a live feed from a telescope near Pluto. It was focused on a different part of the consensus fleet, a logistical hub ship belonging to a neutral species, the Gentle Geth. The image magnified. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the Geth ship shimmered and vanished, reappearing instantaneously 5,000 kilometers off its port side, in a perfect, pre-calculated position that caused no collisions but sent the entire fleet into navigational chaos. The human transmission returned to Thorn. We have analyzed your slipstream drives. We have improved them. We can move your ships before you can fire your weapons. We can drop a Geth freighter into your Dreadnought's bridge, or into the atmosphere of your homeworld, Ethel. This is not a weapon of destruction. It is a tool of repositioning. She leaned forward, her focused eyes filling every screen in the fleet. We do not wish to fight you. We wish for you to leave. But understand this. The Veltri committed an act of genetic warfare upon our entire species. The consensus allowed it. This is our only demand. The Veltri, as a government and as a species, will be handed over to human jurisdiction to answer for their crime. Until then, any Veltri ship, any Veltri asset beyond their home system, is forfeit. You have 19 hours. Withdraw. The transmission ended. The silent, weaponless human ship hung in the void. Across the consensus fleet, tactical displays fizzed with panic. Their technology, the foundation of their power, had just been rendered not just obsolete, but a liability in human hands. The humans hadn't built a bigger gun. They had changed the rules of the game. And for the first time, the galaxy looked into the void and saw not a monster roaring in rage, but a quiet, meticulous chess master, already 10 moves ahead. The consensus fleet withdrew, not in an orderly fashion, but in a rout of humiliated confusion. The demonstration was too profound, too undermining. How do you fight an enemy who can teleport your own allies into your path? The political fallout was instantaneous. The Veltri were not just pariahs. They had become a diplomatic poison. Their calls for a united front were met with stony silence or outright condemnation. The galaxy, faced with a human ultimatum that asked for only one thing, made the cold calculation: sacrifice the Veltri to appease the frighteningly focused newcomers. The Veltri homeworld, Ethel, was a masterpiece of serene beauty. Floating cities suspended in crystalline skies, forests of singing glass, oceans of liquid light. Now, it was a planet under siege, not by blockading warships, but by isolation. Trade ceased. Communication lines went quiet. They were alone. Inside the great spires, the ruling conclave fractured. The Talons screamed for a final, glorious war, to die with honor. The scientists whispered of hidden doomsday devices, of burning their own world rather than surrendering. Kalen, a broken prophet haunting the halls, spoke of the only path left: unconditional surrender. They do not want our extinction, he rasped. They want accountability. Give them our leaders, our data, our unconditional submission. It is the only way to preserve the species. He was shouted down. Veltri pride, 10,000 years deep, could not fathom kneeling to a species they still saw as barbarous children. They chose defiance. They activated their planetary shield, a magnificent energy dome that had never been tested in real war. They powered their ancient orbital defenses. They would make humanity bleed for every inch. Humanity's response was not a fleet. It was a single small probe. It slipped through the outer defenses unnoticed, not by stealth, but by being too insignificant to trigger alarms. It settled into a low orbit and began to broadcast. Not a warning, not an ultimatum. It broadcast data to every Veltri citizen, on every screen, in every public square and private comm. It streamed files. The original gentling proposal, with Kalen's calm, paternal voice outlining the pruning. The hidden reports on the retrovirus's true, focusing effects. The casualty list from the convenient 1918 influenza pandemic, with genetic markers highlighting the virus's artificial spread. The Veltri Telone attack on the Sarian research station. The panic in their own conclave. It was all there, raw, unedited, a mirror held up to their civilization. The effect was not instant rebellion, but a deep, soul-shattering corrosion. The myth of the Veltri as gentle shepherds died in a single generation. Public trust evaporated. The shield generators, manned by crews who had just seen their government's crimes, suffered technical failures. Whole districts of the floating cities went dark as engineers, sickened, walked off the job. The human probe then broadcast a new message. Eris Thorn again, her face calm. People of Veltri, Your government has betrayed you as it betrayed us. You have 24 hours to surrender it to us. If you do not, we will enforce the surrender ourselves. We will target military and governmental infrastructure only. Evacuate those areas. This is your only warning. The Conclave, now holed up in the central spire, declared the humans liars, the data fabrications. They ordered the Talons to fire on any civilians attempting to flee government zones, calling them traitors. The 24-hour mark arrived. Space above Ethel rippled, not with the flash of warships, but with the arrival of 6 massive asteroid-like structures. They were not armed. They were generators. As one, they activated. A deep, subsonic hum vibrated through the planet's very crust. The Veltri planetary shield flickered, not failing, but changing. The humans had analyzed its frequency, its quantum signature. The generators did not overpower it. They harmonized with it, and then began to slowly, inexorably, lower its frequency. The shimmering, radiant dome that protected Ethel began to dim, shifting from brilliant gold to a dull red, then to a murky brown. It was not being broken. It was being tuned to block all sunlight. Within an hour, Ethel was plunged into a deep, artificial twilight. The singing glass forests fell silent. The liquid light oceans grew dull. The humans had not fired a shot. They had turned off the sun. The message from the probe was succinct. Your shield now blocks 99.7% of solar radiation. Atmospheric and geothermal heat will sustain life for approximately 30 standard days before critical biosphere collapse begins. The frequency will continue to lower until your government is surrendered. We are prepared to wait. It was a siege of cosmic proportions. The Veltri could lower their own shield, but that would leave them defenseless. They could try to fight, but their orbital weapons, powered by solar collectors, were starving for energy. Their society, a masterpiece of delicate ecological balance, began to die around them. Plants wilted, temperatures plummeted. Panic turned to desperation, then to grim realization. The humans were not monsters of fire and claw. They were surgeons of consequence. They had taken the Veltri's own tool, their symbol of safety and technological prowess, and turned it into the instrument of their judgment. On the 15th day of twilight, with the temperature nearing freezing even in the equatorial cities, the Veltri people finally acted. It was not the Talons or the scientists. It was the maintenance workers, the engineers, the farmers, the ordinary citizens who had seen the data and felt the cold. They marched in their millions, wrapped in thermal sheets, towards the central spire. They carried no weapons. They simply turned off the power grids feeding the spire's life support. They disabled the local shield projectors protecting the conclave. The Talons, faced with their own frozen, starving people, found their weapons slipping from numb grips. Honor meant nothing in the endless night. Kalen, from his exile, was brought forward. He stood on a balcony, facing his people under the eerie, brown dome sky. He transmitted his surrender, not just of the government, but of the Veltri spirit. We chose to be gardeners of other souls, he said, his voice cracking with cold and grief. And we planted a seed of frost. We yield to the harvest. The signal went out to the human generators. The deep hum ceased. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the great shield began to clear, shifting from brown to red to gold, letting the first piercing rays of their sun touch the frozen world. It was the light of a new, terrible dawn. A single, unarmed human transport ship descended through the now open shield. From it emerged Eris Thorn and a small contingent of humans in simple, dark uniforms. They walked through the silent, shattered streets of the highest floating city, where the Veltri conclave knelt in the cold light, awaiting their fate. Thorn stopped before Kalen. He looked up, expecting to see hatred triumph in her eyes. He saw only that terrifying, focused calm. "Ambassador Kalen," she said, "you are now in human custody. The trial of your species will now begin." Document 5. The trial was not held on Earth or Ethel. It was held on a neutral, barren planetoid in the former quarantine zone, under the watch of the entire galaxy via subspace link. It was not a trial of individuals, but of a civilization's choices. Humanity presented its evidence, the genetic records, the historical impact of the Genitling, the Veltry's own hidden files. They did not scream for vengeance. They laid out the consequences with forensic detachment. The alteration of the human evolutionary path, the millions dead from the Taylor influenza, the psychological shaping of their entire species into something they were never meant to be. The Veltry had no defense. They could only plead that their intentions, however misguided, were born of a paternalistic desire to prevent greater galactic harm. They begged for mercy. The human judgment, when it came, was delivered by a panel of their leaders, with Eris Thorn speaking. It was worse than any punishment the galaxy had imagined. There were no executions, no orbital bombardments, no enslavement. Your crime, Thorn stated, her voice echoing across the stars, was the arrogance of control. You sought to prune a species to fit your garden. Therefore, your sentence is this: the Veltry civilization, as a galactic actor, is hereby dissolved. Your fleet is to be dismantled. Your off-world colonies are forfeit and will be granted autonomy under consensus oversight. Your homeworld, Ethel, will remain yours. A murmur of relief swept through the Veltry and the watching galaxy. It was lenient, but Thorn continued, her words turning to ice. However, the knowledge that led to your crime, the belief that you have the right or wisdom to guide another species' destiny, is a poison. That poison must be purged. For the next 10 generations, the Veltry people are forbidden from engaging in any form of genetic research, xenopsychology, or interstellar governance. Your history, from this day forward, will be amended. The gentling, the quarantine, this trial, all of it will become the central, defining truth of your culture. Not as a legend of past glory, but as your foundational sin. Every child will learn it first. Every achievement of your past will be viewed through its lens. You will become a living monument to the consequences of arrogance. She looked directly at the view screen, addressing the wider galaxy. And this is the secret the galaxy will now keep, not out of shame for us, but out of fear of becoming them. The Veltry are not to be helped in evading this sentence. They are not to be pitted as victims. They are to be a reminder. Look upon them, and remember the 73rd law. Do not anger the humans. For if you do, we will not destroy you. We will define you. We will make your crime the entirety of your identity until you have truly understood its weight. The sentence was executed with brutal efficiency. Human and consensus oversight teams saw to the dismantling of the Veltry fleet, the scrubbing of their databases of all related advanced science, the installation of a historical curriculum that began with their crime. The Veltry were returned to their beautiful, wounded world. They still had their art, their music, their glass forests, but it was all stained. Every song seemed to echo with the silence of the Twilight Siege. Every masterpiece of engineering was a shadow of the shield that doomed them. Kalen, in his final days, walked in a regenerating glass forest. The sun was bright, but it felt like the twilight never truly left. A young Veltry, a historian, approached him. Elder, the youth asked, his crest low, will they ever forgive us? Kalen watched a bird, its feathers adapted to the new, slightly colder climate, struggle to sing the old songs. It is not about forgiveness, child, he said, his voice a dry whisper. They have moved beyond it. They have given us a purpose, to be a warning. We are the fence at the edge of the cliff. We are the label on the poison vial. We are the story told to naughty children. That is our fate, to be useful. Centuries passed. The Veltry became what the humans had decreed, a quiet, introspective people, their gaze forever turned inward at their own flaw. Their once great spires were maintained not as centers of power, but as museums of failure. The galaxy, true to the unspoken decree, let them be. Ambitious young races, when they grew too proud, were sometimes taken to see the Twilight Planet, to hear the story of the Veltry and the humans. The 73rd law was never written into any official charter. It didn't need to be. It was etched into the psyche of every spacefaring species. Humanity, meanwhile, joined the galactic consensus. They were polite, collaborative, brilliant contributors. They never spoke of the Veltri unless asked. They showed no aggression. But there was a quality to them, a focused reserve, a calm that suggested infinite patience and unimaginable depths of calculation. They never broke a treaty. They never started a fight. But when crossed in even minor matters, their responses were always perfectly proportional, impeccably timed, and utterly devastating in their effectiveness. They had become the galaxy's unstoppable force of consequence. On Ethel, under its now familiar sun, the Veltri tended their gardens. They pruned their trees with a nervous, ritual care, always remembering the price of pruning a soul. And in the quiet nights, they would look up at the stars, not with wonder or ambition, but with the sober knowledge of what waited out there in the dark. Not monsters, but judges. And the most terrifying secret the galaxy kept was not that humanity was cruel, but that they were right. And their justice was a cage not of bars, but of memory, colder and more enduring than any metal, a monument built from the pride of those who dared to anger them.